There's never a dull week in Australian football, and this week was certainly no different. Unite Round has had a venue change and will now take place at Jubilee Stadium in Cogra. Sydney FC gets their first win on the board this season. Melbourne City dropped points for the first time this season, as do Canberra United. Western United collapsed against the Melbourne Victory, which I believe set a new record for the fastest goal in A-League women history from Emily Gilnick. The Brisbane Roar keep on rolling. The Para Matildas are one win away from lifting a World Cup trophy, and we have a 36-player Matildas squad to talk about. So there's a lot of things to get stuck into here on the Dubcast, part of the Roundball Australia podcast network. My name is Poletti, and joining me this evening to help break it all down is Burke. A few weeks ago, you came on this podcast and said that you were very much pro-union. After today's news, are you still pro-union?
I absolutely am. I will never not be pro-union. The world could have, we could have experienced the heat death of the universe and the tiny little particles of me that are floating around. Those will be pro-union too. I understand that the point of a strike is to be disruptive, and they are achieving that as much as it is disruptive to me personally. But yes, always.
Yeah, the only question is whether the rail, tram, and bus union will walk all night by the big cooling tower. Christian Montegan, do you think they will?
I'm not too sure, to be honest, but I think this calls for Unite Round to switch to Melbourne instead of Sydney last minute. I mean, you've changed the pitch already. Why don't you just change the actual city? I mean, why not? I'm just putting it out there.
Because you don't have two fit stadiums.
We can all play at Amy Park every 2 hours. Just keep playing one by one. It's fine. Our pitch can hold up better than Leichhardt Oval, that's for sure.
National teams playing at 5 a.m. when it's overseas, they're not going to be able to do that.
I've split over 3 days, obviously. I reckon it's doable.
I'll play it over a week. Why not?
And that is the voice of Chris Macpherson. Chris, how are you this evening?
I'm well, Poletti. Thank you. It's a lot happening.
There is indeed. Now, usually we'll start off where I go around and ask all my wonderful co-hosts about their big storyline for the weekend. But I'm going to go first because we need to get stuck straight into Unite Round and everything that has gone on around it. So we need to start with Sydney FC 1, Western United 0 on Saturday. We'll get into the game itself later. But it was not a great pitch, Chris.
Look, it wasn't a great pitch when you look at it in terms of the appearance. I was fortunate enough on Sunday to be having a chat with a couple of the Sydney players. They were quite happy with how it played, but it looked horrendous. How the Inner West Council, the APL, Sydney FC, etc., couldn't have foreseen that, and we'll get to the broader pieces of it around Unite Round, I'm sure, later, but it just doesn't look great. We did make light of the fact that they probably should have painted it green like Newcastle did at Cessnock in week 1, especially since it was against Wanderers, because that would have just been great to see the meltdowns. But at the end of the day, it worked for the home side. They got 3 points.
They did indeed. Look, I said to a few people that, look, the pitch looked better in person than it did on the broadcast, but it was marginally better. It improved as the game went on, but I think one of the big concerns was whether it was going to hold up for 6 games of football in 3 days. And I think I said I didn't think it would, and the APL came to the same conclusion on Monday. They went and inspected the pitch at Leichhardt and deemed it not up to par, and made the decision to move all the games in the A-League Women for Unite Round to Jubilee Stadium.
So what's actually happened in the past couple of weeks to actually get the pitch in that bad of a state? So I mentioned this last night on the podcast with Roundball. I mean, Lockie didn't really have
the short answer, Christian, from what we can piece together, and again, this is somewhat educated hypothesis, but looking at the pitch, the rugby league markings have obviously set in when they've painted them. The ryegrass has been allowed to die off to some level in those areas where it would have probably been weaker due to the paint, I'm assuming. Again, I'm not a horticulturalist, but I'll have a crack. And that's essentially what's happened, because that's Poletti. There was those areas as well as some high traffic areas. Just looks like the underlying ryegrass, which is the winter grass, has died off. It hasn't thickened back up for summer, and again, the last rugby league and rugby union games were 6 to 8 weeks ago. So, obviously very surprising. Only happened in the last, 72 hours prior to that game on the weekend.
Yeah, it is baffling to me. I mean, I know that the NRL were doing sort of like that the Pacific Championship. So my only thought was Leichhardt used as a training base that no one was aware of, and that's contributed to it. But I don't. I'm surely they would have had better facilities too for the national team to train at than Leichhardt Oval. But yeah, so all games moved to Jubilee Stadium. Entry is now free for the A-League Women's. All shuttles and activations that were scheduled are still set to take place. Ticket holders will be offered a full refund. Now, getting to the stadium could be a little bit of an issue. So there was a lot of excitement because, okay, stadium's 5 minutes from a train station by foot. Jubilee, it's great. And then the rail, tram, and bus union on Tuesday announced a continuing of their ongoing industrial action over pay and conditions with the New South Wales government. And we'll see a near complete shutdown of the rail network from Thursday at 10 p.m. until Sunday 6 a.m. As it currently stands, unless things change. So the wording used, if I can.
While you dig that out, Poletti, I'm just going to point out that 90% of the time on about half the lines on weekends, it's buses replacing trains in this day and age anyway, because of all the ongoing constant track work that's required to maintain things. So, welcome to the world of anyone that has to go any more than about 15 minutes on a train outside of Central on the weekends.
Yes, I have been caught out way too many times, not realising there was track work on my wonderful journey from Campbelltown to the CBD. Will impact Sydney intercity and suburban lines only, is the wording. So interstate services are still running, but yeah, it's basically a near complete shutdown of the rail network. So for the A-League men, it's pretty good. The Allianz is serviced by bus, by light rail, and pretty easy to get to once you're in the city itself. It's just going to be getting into the city that's a problem. I believe Cogra is serviced by buses, but I'm not 100% sure off the top of my head.
Yeah, there's some buses that'll go through to like near where the Carlton station is, which is the closest one. Unfortunately, the prime mode of transport that is the most efficient to get from Central to there, again being city-based, is the train line, which ironically would not be the situation if we were going to Leichhardt, because light rail is what runs to Leichhardt. But anyway, isn't it ironic? I think there was a song about that.
Yes, there probably is. Some Canadian singer, I'm not sure who. It is unclear what services, if any, will still be running in terms of whether there might be a train every hour, every 2 hours, something like that. These are all things that could be negotiated that we don't have at the time of recording. So for those travelling in to the airport, a little PSA, there are buses that you can catch when you exit the baggage claim terminal. If you turn to your left and walk down and around a corner, there will be bus bays, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of friendly airport staff willing to help you. But the match schedule is still the exact same, just a new venue and a lot more difficulty in getting there. Now that we've got that out of the way, Burke, what was your big storyline in Australian women's football over the last 7 days?
Mine probably was the announcement of the final Matildas squad for the year. I attended to that presser, and seeing 36 names on the list was very exciting and also very surprising. I was expecting there to be a few new names, but definitely not that many.
Yeah, so a 36-player squad. The last two games, as we understand it, are essentially going to be an A-League Women All-Star squad. A lot of people getting their first call-up, some getting called up again, like Jess Nash, who hasn't been part of a camp, off the top of my head, since the first friendlies against the USA post-COVID. Izzy Gomez gets a call-up. Matilda McNamara, Hannah Lowry, Tash Pryor. I'm missing a name here as well. Matilda McNamara, Leah Davidson gets a call up. Morgan Aquino gets a call up. So these are all players with only a handful or no caps at all. A lot of the usual suspects: Ellie Carpenter, Steph Catley, Kyra Cooney-Cross, Caitlin Ford, Mary Fowler, etc., etc., etc. Look, I've been saying that I was expecting a 35-player squad, so I was off by one. So I'm pretty proud of myself for only being off by one. I'm very disappointed that there's no Sasha Grove here. I thought I know she had that very poor performance against Wellington Phoenix to start the season, which probably didn't work in her favour. But I thought if there was ever a time to bring in someone like Sasha Grove, a 36-player camp was the time to do so, particularly when, if she is going to play, it would be against Chinese Taipei.
Sorry, I thought the same thing about Alexia Apostolakis. I thought this was going to be her big in, but we wait for the next round, I guess.
Yes, we do indeed. Christian, are there any names that stand out to you?
I'm just trying to go through the list now and double check if there are any standouts. I mean, probably Isabel Gomez is one I didn't really expect to get a call up, but that was a bit surprising to me. Not that she doesn't deserve it. I think she's been outstanding, since last season with the Mariners. I think she definitely does warrant the call up. It's just with the 36 players, I think it's less surprising given the amount of players in the squad. But it's an opportunity for someone like her to just, I guess, prove her worth in the Matildas camp. You're not going to get this opportunity much, right? Because in future camps, it's going to be back to the same 23, 25 player squad, right? So I think Tom Sermanni is just using this opportunity to assess a lot of the younger players in particular. But at the same time, I'm a tad worried because remember when Tony Gustavsson, for example, the friendly against Spain when we lost 7-0. And that was a complete, young side. It was inexperienced. And then Gustavsson copped a lot of backlash, for his selections. And I just worry that this squad is going to be too imbalanced for these friendlies. I know Chinese Taipei is going to be, we do expect to sort of get the win there. But I just think overall, I think Sermanni has to be a tad careful of how he approaches it.
I mean, we all know that Tom Sermanni loves a cheeky call up and a cap, but I think the other problem for what you mentioned as well is he's only the interim coach. I would hope that by the time the first window of the new year rolls around, we have a coach in place and it's not Tom being the interim coach, which could impact as well. I'm sure he'll pass notes on to whoever the coach is. This is who I thought did well in this camp. This is why. This is who I thought did poorly. This is why. But you're going to have a new coach coming in who's going to want to see all these players for himself or herself or themselves. We don't discriminate here at the Dubcast. You've got this idea of trying to balance that while you're preparing for an Asian Cup on home soil as well. Even though they are friendly windows, there's only very limited opportunities in which to assess everyone. And so I very much like the idea of the extended call-up here. Chris, any names on the list that stood out to you?
Well, one that obviously stands out, and as always, it probably ties back to a little bit of my Newcastle Jets bias, but is Natasha Pryor. I think a really interesting selection, purely from the point, you threw some names out before that are either uncapped or low caps, and let's go through a couple of those. Jessica Nash, Jamila Rankin, Briley Henry. They've all got one thing in common. They're all very much in their early 20s. Now, again, you said we don't disadvantage and discriminate here on the Dubcast. Natasha, a little older than them. She's 26. I mean, she's certainly well, in her football midst. But it's probably a surprising one for me. I think it's really good recognition. She's been an absolute rock at the back for Newcastle in their defence and has been a key part of how they managed to stay in some games. And realistically, without her, they probably don't qualify for the semi-finals and go on the run they did last year. But yeah, it was probably a little surprising. Glad to see it though, because it's always great for that spread around the A-League and not just a cluster of Melbourne City and Sydney players.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's not even anything like very interesting, but I'm mildly surprised about the inclusion of Morgan Aquino, mostly because I didn't realize anyone on Earth watched the USL. That was all.
That's harsh.
Well, the answer is
they
Tom
get
Sermanni
good crowds, and good for him. Someone's got to, I guess. They get good crowds in person, but I've never heard a thing about anyone on Earth watching them outside of those in-person crowds. So good for her for managing to break through despite that.
I mean, I've been watching the USL, but that's the men's edition because my beloved Lights FC made a run to the Western Conference Final where they were sadly eliminated over the weekend. First finals appearance in team history. So So, onwards and upwards. Viva Lights. Chris Macpherson, what was your big storyline coming out of Australian football in the last 7 days?
Well, Burke kind of stole my thunder a little, but that's okay. I think the big story or the little bit of a highlight reel piece for me was some of the goals across the dub on the weekend and some of the debuts. Again, my Newcastle Jets slant on. Newcastle Jets getting that win, but also managing to get some debuts in that game, and most notably, someone Poletti who you would have seen, Claire Adams, who's come through the emerging Jets, an absolute set piece specialist. She's an absolute gun. For her to make that debut for Newcastle at Maitland as a Maitland junior is a very limited opportunity that not a lot of people get to do, to play in front of your home crowd in a regional area to make your debut. And look, she only got limited minutes, but it was really impressive. So another one. I think there was a few debuts across the competition on the weekend. So great to see more young talent coming through the competition. I think is a huge piece as we continue to develop the A-League W.
It is indeed, and we'll go into that game. Newcastle 1, Wellington 0. Jets win through Cass Davis goal. She doesn't score often, but when she does, it's a screamer. You wrote for the report card this week that you thought there were positive signs for the Jets, Chris.
Yeah, there certainly were. Before we go too far, I just want to point out I interviewed Cass post game on the pitch for the club, and she admitted it was a cross, which I'm absolutely bemused by why you would admit that, and just I'd be claiming it. But again, that's the difference between Cass Davis and I. But yeah, it took her 8 years to get a goal. Now she's got four in the last two. So look at her going for goal of the year again. But yeah, look, there were positives for the Jets. No goals conceded is a good one, but when the other team has no shots on target, that's generally reasonably easy to do. But in terms of the Jets, a lot of positivity though. Without Libby Copus-Brown, their build-up play was really good. They created a number of opportunities. They're still, without Serena Bolden, they're a little gun-shy in terms of pulling the trigger in front of the net. So that was a bit of a concern for me. But I think in terms of their build-up play, the way they structured, the way they adapted as well, and in his post-game interviews, Ryan Campbell talked about that around the fact that they adapted to playing with moving back to two wing-backs partway through the first half. Then that they weren't able to penetrate through Wellington, and so they were going around them and utilising that, and it worked. They managed to get around behind their midfield and then play the ball in from there to create those opportunities. Again, taking those opportunities is going to be the next step for Newcastle, but to finally get the 3 points, they've been, probably arguably well in the games that they've played in. They probably should have beaten the Wanderers. They probably could have got a draw against Perth. Again, it's about taking their opportunities, and that's the bit that they missed for a long time. They found with Serena. And I know, Poletti, that I'm preaching to the choir when I talk about how much we miss Serena Bolden.
Yes, we do miss Serena Bolden indeed. Chris, you mentioned something to me on Sunday night after the game, I believe it was. This idea that I believe you said that Ryan Campbell said he felt that Wellington were the best side they'd come up against so far this season.
Yeah, the direct quote was they are better than the teams we've played against already this year. So he was very happy to get the 3 points. A very interesting one. And to be fair, I think defensively, Wellington were really good. And I'm having an absolute mental blank. Their keeper was phenomenal outside of that goal that she conceded. Having a mental blank on her name. I think they brought her in from Spain or Portugal at the start of this season.
I think Benfica it was.
Benfica, thank you, mate. So Portugal, yeah. I am having a mental blank, and I'll come back to that.
Carolina Diaz.
That's her, yeah. So, Carolina she was phenomenal, and she just got caught off a line. She's been pretty strong for them, but yeah, Ryan certainly touched on that point that he thought they were the best side they've played against this year, essentially, to paraphrase. So, it's an interesting piece. I think, and we'll talk about Wanderers and probably Perth later on, and certainly for one of those two teams, I'm not surprised that he saw it that way. The other one, maybe, but again, I don't know that they saw the best of them, that we've maybe seen those slow improvements from. So it's an interesting piece there. I think Newcastle deserving the 3 points. Wellington, they're going to have some real queries around what's going on there. I think they're going to be challenged this year. They haven't scored in their last two games. They haven't scored from general play. They scored 2 goals in the first game. One was an own goal. One was a penalty. And again, as I said, really worrying for me, 0 shots on target. That's a fairly condemning statistic, especially when you're playing against a side that has been known under Ryan Campbell and even prior to him, Gary Van Egmont's tenure, as a team that's kind of happy to win 4-3. Like Newcastle are a side that are happy to try and, play open flowing football. So, yeah, if you're not getting shots on target against Newcastle, I think you're going to really struggle to chalk wins.
Yeah, sorry, it's Carolina Villau. She goes by Carolina Villau, so my apologies for that. Burke, they're now without Rebecca Lake, who's been ruled out for the season, without a point through their first 3 games and a -4 goal difference. They've got Adelaide on Friday night, so it's not like it gets any easier for Wellington at this point. What can they do to turn this ship around?
That's a really good question, and I'm glad that my answer isn't going to be the real one. God bless the coaching staff for what they have to do there. And they're also missing Annalie Longo because she got a facial fracture in that game, which
No,
doesn't sound like
they've
fun.
cleared
But
her of the fracture, but
oh
yeah, they cleared her of the fracture today, but she'll miss the game this weekend.
yeah, missing her is also not great. I think one of the things I'd really like to see from Wellington is to play more of Mebe, is that how you say her name? Tanaka? I think she's a really exciting
Maybe
player.
Tanaka, yeah.
She scored a like ton of goals playing for Preston. And I think she's going to be one of those players that's only going to get better the more game time she gets. So I don't know how they're going to solve all of their problems, but I think putting her in is going to be a real positive for them.
It certainly sounds like it would be, and that's about as much praise as you'll see me give the NPL Victoria. Christian, we'll go to Melbourne victory 4, Western United 1. First half hat trick for Emily Gilnick, opening the scoring 10 seconds in. You wrote that Chidiac and Flannery had standout games. Sum this game up for us.
Well, firstly, you haven't asked for my big storyline for the week.
Did I not?
No. And you know what's funny? You've just read my mind, because this is the game that is my big storyline, because it's Emily Gilnick's Oh, you mentioned Newcastle Jets. Don't give me that, Chris. No, surely Emily Gilnick's first half hat trick has to be right up there. Yeah, she was phenomenal. Top goal scorer so far, up to 3 games, 6 goals so far. Yeah, she was just tremendous all over the place. And we had this discussion last week on the pod with Roundball about Hayden Matthews in the A-League men's with Sydney, how he got his call up for the Socceroos, his maiden call up, and perhaps that sort of played into his red card to an extent because of the pressure. You know, he wants to prove his worth. And now with Gilnick obviously being recalled back with the Matildas under Sermanni, I think that's sort of given her an extra boost of confidence, and she's taken it in a stride. And you can tell, you know, through her energy, the performance, the intensity, just everything. I just thought it was exceptional. And yeah, obviously Western United made a couple of defensive howlers, which I guess we'll touch on a bit more in depth later. But, you know, the first goal in particular, to score after 10 seconds, that just showed Western United just weren't up to the races from the get-go. And it was right throughout. I just thought Western were really disjointed through large parts of the game, and Victory were just there to pounce and dominate. So fair play to them. O'Grady's goal as well on the counter. From the halfway line, that was exceptional as well. Just fresh legs as well off the bench for Victory. So they've got sort of weapons all over the place. You know, Alana Murphy as well, which I've touched on the past couple of weeks, just in midfield, sort of controlling things. So yeah, Victory just have, I guess, a lot of positive signs moving forward. And that was just my real highlight in general, because I thought, you know, if this version of Victory can sustain itself for the whole season, you know, given Sydney's early struggles, given City, okay, I expect City to, you know, improve, you know, obviously somewhat. It's only early days. But yeah, if Victory can sustain this level, I think it's going to be very scary for the rest of the competition.
The great Roddy Piper once said, just when you think you have all the answers, I change the questions. And that's what I've done just then. I was reading your mind, Christian, and I've decided to skip straight ahead. What happened here for Western United? Because it was a very un-Western performance. Do you think it was a one-off, or is it a cause for concern?
Look, I think it was a one-off. I certainly wasn't expecting this kind of performance. You know, under a Cat Smith side, I expected, you know, defensive solidity. We saw that for large parts last season. Yeah, but they just looked all over the shop, you know, to my surprise. And I actually predicted Western United to get the win here. You know, I know it was at the home of the Matildas, but, you know, sort of a derby game. You know, last season I thought Western United played relatively well against Victory in those fixtures last season once Cat Smith arrived. And yeah, I was just very shocked at the just the lack of energy, the lack of, I guess, ideas going forward. There was just sort of really none of it. They scored their goal from a set piece through Zimmerman, but it was sort of not a consolation because it was only the 20th minute mark. That's how crazy the game was. It was 2-1 victory after 20 minutes. But yeah, from a Western United perspective, I think a few questions are going to be asked. I think, in terms of the setup, how easily they were able to be broken down, I think that will concern Smith quite a bit. But I do think, this team does have the talent to turn things around for sure, only 3 games in. But yeah, like I said, very surprised how, easily they'll just picked apart.
Burke, I believe you were there as well?
I wasn't. No, I'm actually starting a campaign to have all Sunday games in Melbourne banned because I work on Sundays. So, yeah, if you would like
I'll be
to
interested to see how
join
that
my
goes.
campaign, please let me know. No, so I wasn't at it, but I
Okay,
was watching it intermittently on my phone. So I did check it a couple of times. I remember right at the start being like, "Wait a minute, what do you mean they've scored there? What do you mean they've scored there again?" And just going on like that. So
Okay, so just to Chris, I will come to you in a second. Just before I do go to you, Chris. So far, we've had let's move Unite round to Melbourne and let's ban Sunday games in Melbourne. Just so I make sure we're all on the same page here.
I'm on the same page for the first part
yes,
because I suggested it. Not so much the second one of Burke's suggestion. I'm not on
Hang
that
on,
same page.
Burke wanted to unionise you guys, so
That's true.
I'm always pro-union. Everyone should be unionized. If you're not in a union, join your union.
I think we'll leave the political away from this. Otherwise, we're going to get ourselves in trouble in terms of differing viewpoints, I think. But anyway, I just wanted to touch on a statistical thing. Anyone that's caught the couple of episodes of the Round Ball pod that when I've been on there, I do like a statistic. Talking about Emily Gelnick, she is now equal second in terms of hat tricks with 4 alongside a player you might have heard of called Sam Kerr, behind only the great Michelle Heyman. She's 4th on the list of all-time scorers for the A-League as well. But the one stat that I did want to just mention for Christian's benefit is this is the first time that Melbourne Victory have ever beaten Western United in the A-League dub.
Wow, not even once. I thought maybe one time. I know they've struggled in recent fixtures, but yeah, that's
explains why you tipped Western United.
Yeah, it must have been, but not just because of that. Because victory against Melbourne City, I thought they just weren't consistent throughout the 90 minutes. I think Western United just had a bit more, I guess, to show, especially in the early parts of the season. I think Jeff Hopkins is sort of still trying to assemble his side moving forward. So I think there would have been a couple of growing pains, but no, I was proven completely wrong.
Struggled in recent years. When you've only been in the competition for 2 years, I think all fixtures count as recent fixtures, Christian.
Okay. Is this a bashing Christian segment, is it?
Sure, why not? We will stay in Melbourne now. Melbourne City 2, Central Coast Mariners 3. Now, I know you were at this game, Burke. It's the first time City have dropped points this year. Alexia Apostolakis opened the scoring before Annalise Rasmussen equalised in the 5th minute. Football New South Wales League 1 product, Annalise Rasmussen, and the first player signed for the Central Coast Mariners from their academy. Lourdes Bosch in the 33rd and Izzy Gomez in the 76th gave us the 2-2 scoreline. What was this game, Burke?
I'm going to be honest with you. This game was hot. Like, it was really, really hot. And I couldn't pay that much attention to it because it was so hot. Because I don't know if you've been to control cyber fields, but I would not recommend it when it's 33 degrees because there is no shade. And they didn't even hand out Zupa Dupas this game. Absolutely appalling behavior. I should be writing them a letter. No, the game was just very, very strange. Yeah, it seemed like neither team wanted to really defend in the first 10 minutes. They were just like, yeah, whatever. Score a goal. Who cares? We're not here. They did seem to settle late in the first half, and then you could really tell that the heat was becoming a real factor for both sides. Everyone looked very lethargic towards the end of the game. I think the Central Coast have done really, really well to get the point. If anything, they may They may well have deserved all 3 points because they did score that one goal that was ruled offside that I honestly didn't know had happened because I couldn't see it from where I was standing in the only strip of shade I could find. That was a pole that blocked my view. But yeah, they did really well to get the point off of City. I think they ran a really tight ship and had a great success in shutting down Mariana Speckmaier because I think this is the first game she's played for City that she hasn't scored a goal in. Yeah, and they took their opportunities when they came and when they could find them.
Speckmaier, I noticed, played a bit more out wide. Is that something that you expect more from the City side moving forward? Because I, associate more her being more in a central role.
The direct, yeah, no, I definitely see that, and I think they were trying something different, and I think they have found it doesn't work. So I would expect them to go back to what they were doing previously because it hadn't failed them until now.
City dropped points for the first time this year. Is that a concern, Burke?
I wouldn't say so. No, this isn't like when they first joined the league in 2016 when they had the crazy amounts of money and facilities. Everyone's definitely caught up a lot in terms of youth development, and hopefully their facilities are much better than they were. I don't think it's not ringing any alarm bells for me just yet. I mean, Sydney only won a game this week.
Fair enough.
Let's relax.
While we're on Melbourne v Sydney, thank you for the segue, Burke. You guys want to host Unite Round, and you got a crowd of 500 people, and I know you're going to tell me it was hot, but I hate to tell you, Unite Round's going to be closer to summer.
Oh no! So the other thing with Control Cyber Field is that it's about maybe an hour's drive away from the city, so no one should be going there anyway. In general, for me, it was about a 45-minute drive because I live in like the inner southeast of Melbourne. But yeah, it's just in the most out of the way place. So that's also a reason why no one was there.
I'll have to draw you a map and show you where Maitland is, and we get 2,500 people to Jets women's games. But,
Please do. There's also no public transport to get there, which is really just every area of this is grim to me.
5 episodes in, and I've already lost control of the podcast. This is wonderful. But just before we move on to Sydney versus Wanderers, I do want to say everyone who knows me knows that I love a very old pop culture reference. Burke, when you said that you were going to write a letter, the first thing that went through my head was, "Dear Mr. Royal Hampton, I am a white woman in America." And if you get that reference, you're as old as I am. But yes, Sydney 1, Wanderers 0. Kaylee Talon-Henniker scored the only goal of the game, her second in as many games against the Wanderers. We've already talked about the pitch. Chris, you were there with me. Look, neither midfield performed well defensively, and I said after the game to Robbie Hooker when I interviewed him that it was almost like both attacking midfields were able to move through the defensive midfield of the other team like butter, an assessment that he disagreed with. So which side of that do you fall on?
First of all, I love seeing Poletti get coaches offside. It's always wonderful and happens very frequently. I'll err to your side a little there. I think, and again, the conditions, they don't have the excuse that, a couple of other sides did from the weekend. We talked about the Melbourne City game. The Newcastle game similarly was played, in the early 30s. Outside of the pitch, it was perfect conditions. There was a good crowd in, and it looked like, neither midfield really wanted to defend, but they were happy to push forward. They were happy to push up, and then the other side would just counter and wander their way through. It wasn't even necessarily about the intent that they attacked through their midfields with. It was just like they were both happy to, to use my reference from the Jets before. It was like they were both happy to just go, well, have at it, go your worst, and we'll just do it one more time than you do. The cohesion wasn't great, as you say. It was a bit of an odd game. It was really hard as a viewer to get into the game. I won't point out that, there were some of the men's players there who, it was good to see them there, but I'm not sure how engaged they were in the spectacle. But it was hard to see. Unsurprisingly, Kaylee was the one that I was talking to on Sunday who seemed to think that the pitch played well. And unsurprisingly, when she got her second goal, she was wide open. And that was probably, I guess, systemic of what we saw was that there was so often players just with acres of space that players didn't want to push to. She had so much space on that right edge and had all the time in the world to set herself and take that shot. And she wasn't the first nor the last. Probably the most surprising thing for me about this game was that it was only 1-0.
Yeah, I thought that too. I thought coming in that this was either going to be like a 0-0 game because neither side has lit the league on fire, or it was going to be like a 4-3 where everyone just gets their goals out of the way. Let's hit the ground running and let's get goal scoring in form, and then we'll focus on everything else later. Robbie Hooker said that this was the best performance from the Wanderers this year and wants his side to put on a performance like that against the Roar on Friday. Is that an assessment you'd agree with, Chris?
I've seen them twice this year, and that was a lot better than the last time they played. I don't know that it's something that I'd be utilising as my measuring stick, however, if I was Robbie Hooker. But again, I need a sanity check on the bloke. He's doing chin-ups, he's doing push-ups, pitch side, just so that he doesn't swear at referees. Did I get that right?
I think that's the general understanding. Yes, one-armed push-ups, I might add, which as someone who can't even do a normal push-up is just baffles me.
Well, he's been a highlights reel this year. He broke his glasses at Cessnock in round 1 by trying to head a ball that came over the sideline. I'm not sure what came over him, and he had his glasses on his head. So then he had to switch to wearing from his sunglasses to his normal glasses for the rest of the match, I think it was. So anyway, he's entertaining, if nothing else, and picking fights with you in the press conferences. I'm all about him.
Tara Rushton was in complete shock when she gave the interview. Like, what on earth is going on here?
We need more characters, right? It's good. It's good for the game, I think.
It absolutely is, particularly when those games are on free-to-air. But I think I've said my piece about that. So go back and listen to other podcasts. You'll be able to hear what I have to say there. It was a White Chicks reference for those who are listening and not sure what reference I was making before. Sydney have a win on the board before a game against Melbourne City this week at Unite Round, Burke. Sydney get their win on the board. Melbourne City drop points. Is there something in the water there, perhaps, for the Sky Blues? Not the City Blues, the Sky Blues. We have to make that differentiation.
I would say there probably is. I think they couldn't have picked a better time to decide they wanted to win a game, because they're definitely going to need to take all the confidence they can find. Well, not that they're really lacking in confidence, but all of the executing ability, let's put it that way, into this game. So they picked a good time to, I guess, start hitting their form.
I spoke to Ante Juric after the game, and I asked him about sort of the criticism and the negativity that's been coming towards the side so far this season. And he said, look, we take it and we use it as motivation. We don't turn it into a negative. We turn it into a positive, Christian. And I thought that was an interesting approach to take, that because generally when you ask a coach, criticism this, criticism that, they go, I don't read the papers, I don't listen to the podcast, I'm not familiar with it. He's openly come out and said, no, we know the criticism is there and we're using it to fuel us, sort of like a power of positivity.
I'm just trying to think back. Have we criticised Juric in past Dubcast episodes, and is he showed that to his squad of players and said, okay, this particular podcast doubts us? Oh, Chris has?
No, I was just going to say, I just wonder if he's been hanging out with Marco Jesic. That's a reference for the Round Ball Australia fans out there and the Marconi Stallions fans, because they certainly take inspiration from podcasts.
Yes, they certainly do. We found that one out the hard way.
No, but I'm not surprised that he's taken this approach, because in previous seasons when Sydney do get off to sort of a sluggish start, or they're suffering a rough patch, you expect Sydney to bounce straight back, and they use that, like you said, Poletti, as motivation and fuel to the fire, just to like I said, bounce back. And this team certainly has the talent. I've just been a bit concerned with the cohesion within the squad. Even in this game against the Wanderers, it sort of took a bit of time for them to sort of really get going and gel together. So, and against the Wanderers side, who for me, I don't know about you guys, but they don't really impress me. They don't really strike to me as, someone who's going to be, really fighting deep in finals football when that time comes around. So I think for Sydney, it's just going to take a few more weeks for Urish to really start to, get his, I guess, ideas across. I know he's been there for years, but, as each season passes, you still need to really mix things up. New players coming in, players leaving. So yeah, like I said, it's just going to take a bit of time to bring it all together.
Poletti,
Yeah,
can I turn this back on you as someone who's known to have a sky blue slant to your views on things? You asked the question of Burke before, and I'd rather reference it as the Sky Blues taking on the Pale Blues. But anyway, do you take confidence? Do you take confidence out of what you saw at Leichhardt Oval heading into a game against one of the form teams in the competition, if not the form team in the competition?
No, I don't. I think that, look, a win is a win, and there's never a bad time to have a win. But I haven't seen enough from Sydney FC this year to suggest that they'll be able to take it to Melbourne City. I think City, look, they've already played more games than everyone else this season because of their Asian Women's Champions League commitments. They're allowed to slip up. To me, if Sydney have premiership aspirations, they need 3 points against Melbourne City on the weekend because City are a team they're going to be directly competing with. And if that gap opens up any more than it already is, great sporting cliche, it's a 6-pointer, and it's only round 4. It's a 6-pointer in terms of, that premiership chase. So I think, look, I like City very much on the weekend, but, one win turns into 2 wins very easily.
So what you're telling me, Ante Uric, who we know uses these things as motivation, now has quote on the dressing room wall at Cogra this weekend. Poletti says City will win, Sydney cannot. It's a 6-pointer.
Sure, why not? If I can motivate Sydney FC to a win, then I'm more than happy with that. Let's move on to Brisbane Roar 3, Perth Glory 0. Brisbane continued their scintillating form to start the season in dominant fashion. And to me, this very much looked like how Alex Smith wants his side to be playing week in, week out. It was a brace to Tamika Yell up a goal to Tamar Levin. Another quality goal this week. Perth Glory never really looked to be in this one. It's probably the worst performance to date under Stephen Peters. And they were basically chasing the game from the opening whistle. Their brightest spot was sort of like the 3 successive corners straight after half time, but even then, they never really did anything with it. Peters did attempt to inject some spirit into the game twice with Morgan Roberts in the 70th minute and Ella Abdul-Masi in the 80th minute to no avail. Chris is looking at me, for those listening to the audio version. He knows exactly what I've said, and he can't believe I've said it.
I think you are absolutely clutching at straws and possibly a closet Perth fan. This was diabolical. Perth's season so far has been very ordinary. They were lucky to get 3 points against Newcastle. They put together 50 minutes against Melbourne City in week 1. I don't think Melbourne City turned up to the ground till after half time. I just don't know. If Stephen Peters, again, and I know it's never the coach's fault, but he's got to be a short price to be the first one looking for a new job at the way things are going. And I don't want to be hyperbolic, but it's just they've been poor. There's no other word for it. Like they're just right now they are separated by daylight at the back end of the field. We've seen bad games from Wellington. We've seen them from Newcastle. We've seen them from Western Sydney Wanderers. We've seen them from a number of other teams, even Sydney this year. But Perth are dishing it up week in, week out, and I just don't see how they turn it around enough to become a competitive side. On the other side of the ledger, that goal by Tamar Levin for a first A-Leagues goal, absolutely phenomenal. If you have not seen it yet, go and check it out. It was stunning. Wonderful strike from long range. I know Lockie, who's our producer, we were on my other show, we were watching that actual clip and looking at it, and it caught him by surprise. It's great goal, and I think Brisbane, they've really surprised me this season. These two sides have both surprised me for very much opposite reasons. Brisbane, positive beyond measure in terms of what I've expected and what they've turned out. Perth, the other side, like I didn't have high expectations, but they've managed to well and truly just bottom out below those.
I wouldn't say I'm a closet Perth fan. What I'd say is that I want Stephen Peters to do well at Perth. I want a lot of those players to do well at Perth. They've had a big squad turnover. Stephen Peters has been responsible for bringing a lot of those players in. I have spoken to other people who don't think he's the answer to turn things around at Perth, not because of anything that he will or won't do as a coach, but because of circumstances outside of his control as it relates to the club. You sort of half answered this already, Chris. So I'll go to Christian on this one. Look, what are Perth? They held the Premiers for 55 minutes in the opening round before the floodgates opened. They beat the Jets, and now they've gotten steamrolled by the Raw. What are Perth?
Is there a one-word answer to that question, or can I sort of ramble on for 10 minutes? Because seriously, there must be so many different answers to that question. Because you see, against Melbourne City, for example, 2-0 up, you think, okay, this is going to be a really good version of Perth, the one that we saw from last season, where Poletti, I believe you predicted Perth to actually win the Premier's Plate. And
so when we did our Christmas predictions last year, they were flying high.
Yeah.
And then almost as soon as we recorded that video, they came crashing back down to earth.
Curse them.
Yeah, you curse them. The round ball curse, or the Dubcast curse now. But I just think with the players outgoing from the off season for Perth, I just think it's a bit too much this season, too much of an ask. I just look at this squad and think, there's no real inspiration. There's no, cutting edge going forward. I think they're going to really struggle to score goals this season. Hannah Lowry being, a player to obviously depart the club, a couple of others as well. I mean, it's just, you just look at the squad list and you think to yourself, like where's the inspiration going to come from? I just don't see it. And, no matter what formation changes or tweaks that, Perth are going to do, I just don't see any real long-term solutions because, in the short term anyway, I just see Perth sort of suffering a bit of a skydive, to be honest. Hate to say it because I really enjoyed their football last season and what they brought to the table. They were a real surprise package, really competing with the likes of Sydney, right up until the end where unfortunately they faded off. But compared to this season, right from the get-go, they're just, really struggling to score goals and really create opportunities. And if you're going to come up against, bigger sides compared to Brisbane Roar, I mean, you should not be losing to Brisbane 3-0. I mean, Brisbane are better than last season, but that doesn't really excuse a 3-0 loss despite being away from home. So, definitely a lot of questions there. I mean, what are Perth? I really can't answer that with one simple sentence or word because I think it's going to be a real inconsistent and jumbled season for them.
Okay, so Chris said poor. Christian said whatever he said, 5-minute answer. Burke, I will ask you the same question. What are Perth?
Do you want a one-word answer?
Dealer's choice. Go for it.
Basket case.
Do you want to elaborate on that answer?
It makes me sad.
You said one word.
It makes me sad. Yeah. It's a sad state for Perth to be in because there are lots of players there that I really like watching, and I feel like even with the names that they have, they should be performing better than they are. And it's a shame that they're not.
Yeah, that is an assessment I would very much agree with. Just quickly before we move on the Brisbane Roar side of things, I mean, this is probably the best start of the season you could ask for, Chris.
It certainly is. As I said before in my ramblings, Brisbane, I sort of saw them as being a lower mid-table team again this year. I didn't have huge expectations in terms of what they've done, but they've just managed to gel. They've looked really good. They've beaten Sydney. They've obviously done the job against Perth. It's been a solid start from the season. Again, one swallow doesn't make a summer. We're 3 rounds into a long season. But again, I'm positively optimistic about what Brisbane Roar are delivering, and it's a good style of football to watch too, which is one of the really key aspects, I think, is that, we want, good football, especially in these cities where there's only one team or regions where there's only one team, and they're delivering that. They're delivering results as well, because good football is not much good if you're not getting points, right? So they're doing both those things. If they can continue that on at a decent clip for the rest of the season, well, that they could trouble some teams, and we've seen that with that game against Sydney. So, I'll be interested to watch the continued evolution of Brisbane over the coming weeks.
And you'll get a chance to do so at Unite Round against the Western Sydney Wanderers on Friday night, an 8:15 p.m. kickoff. our last game, Canberra United 0, Adelaide United 2. So Adelaide take out the United derby. Goals to Emily Condon and Fiona Wirtz. Canberra dropped points for the first time this season. But for me, the big story here, Burke, is Adelaide just continue to roll on this year. It's the second win on the trot. They look like a vastly different side compared to last season. And they have a chance against Wellington on Friday night or Friday afternoon, I should say, in the opening game of Unite round to make it 3 on the trot, which is not something you would have said last season at any point.
No, I remember seeing the post, the socials and stuff about this game and going, Perth, sorry, they're not. Are Adelaide good? And the answer is, yeah, they might be. And they still have players on the outs that are waiting to come back in from injury as well. So I can see them going pretty far this season if they keep this up. I don't see Wanderers, God, Wellington being too much of a challenge for them if they continue the way that they've gone. Yeah, and I think they're playing some really exciting football. The goals that they're scoring look gorgeous too. So that's always nice to see.
Christian, for me, Fiona Wirtz is an interesting story. Came to Sydney FC last season, spent a bit of time injured, comes back to Adelaide, looks like a completely different player, and continues her run this year of only scoring goals in 2 places on the pitch, on the edge of the 18-yard box or from 2 yards out.
It's incredible, isn't it? Just how much of a change of environment, just suits a player. I mean, last season, like you mentioned, struggled a bit for game time and injuries, and then just comes into Adelaide United, a club which we all, let's be honest, did not expect much from them. Maybe to finish bottom of the table, second last maybe. But yeah, the way they've really started, and with Wirtz, playing as well as she has been, just linking up, connecting with the final third, and just obviously finishing off these chances for an Adelaide side who don't really have, I guess, much depth in terms of that number 9 role and, just goal scoring in general, that prowess. You need players like that to really step up week in, week out to give Adelaide the best chance possible. And what surprised me the most about this side is, I guess, the maturity aspect, so soon since last season, how it just unraveled, so quickly, especially towards the back end of that season. And, to quickly recoup and just to complete U-turn. I just think it's, phenomenal, really. The defensive unit as well, Ella Tonkin, I thought was really a standout in this game. But to keep Canberra scoreless, I thought that was an achievement in itself, because I expected, a 4-3 scoreline. Like goals galore. But for Adelaide to really keep it solid at the back, pick their moments, be mature, like I said, I think that's the real positive sign that they've got to take into this and, to move forward. I think if they just continue on this roll, they could be with a sneaky chance of finals.
Chris, any thoughts on this one?
Well, I think for me, it set a really good tone. This was an easy banana peel game for Adelaide. They found some form the week before, knocked off Western Sydney. We've talked about the Wanderers. To beat Canberra, when you have a look at what their next 3 weeks shapes up as, Adelaide could be sitting very pretty when it comes to just before Christmas when they take on Melbourne City at home. They've got Wellington, Newcastle Jets, and Perth Glory. 3 very winnable games based on the form they've shown. And as we've talked about, I know it's been a feature over the weekend of the conversation inside the broader round ball and dubcast conversations, is that they've got a number of players, as Burke touched on. Some of the names that they've got to come back later in the season, Isabel Hodgson's one of those. So there's some really good footballers to come back in there. It's going to be a question of how do they disrupt that if they are continuing to win. So really looking forward to seeing what Adelaide, a bit like Brisbane, can continue to build. And especially over those next 3 weeks, they could be sitting very pretty on, say, 15 points come mid-December.
We know what's going to happen, right? Poletti's going to predict Adelaide to win the Premier's Play in Christmas, like they did it with Perth last season, and it's going to come all crashing down, and we can just
Poletti's
see it
kiss
from a mile
of death.
away. Yep.
Stay away from Newcastle.
No. What I'm going to do, Christian, is I'm going to predict them to finish second.
So they'll finish second last.
Okay, yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Okay, so that is A-League women's action all wrapped up. We'll move on now to the Matildas, who have run through the group stage at the 2024 IFCPF World Cup undefeated, beating Japan 6-0 to open the tournament. A 3-1 victory against the USA, 9-2 against Ireland before rounding out the group stage with a rotated squad against Denmark with a 9-0 victory, who leave the tournament winless. The spot in the final was already sealed. It came down to the last group stage game to determine who was going to join the Matildas in the final, and perhaps unsurprisingly, it is the USA. This is a matchup that's essentially been 2 years in the making. Now, this game will have taken place by the time you listen to this podcast, because it is Wednesday morning at 12:30 a.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time, and we don't release till much later on Wednesday mornings. So hopefully you are all waking up to the Matildas lifting the IFCPF World Cup trophy, which would be a great way to round out a campaign. It's a campaign I very much enjoyed writing on for Round Ball Australia and covering. And I would highly recommend, if you haven't done so already, go ahead and check some of the interviews I've done. Have a look at some of the recaps. There's some fascinating stories in there that are well worth reading, that will hold their weight well after the tournament has concluded. We'll move on to questions now. We got a number of questions this week coming in. A lot of them have to do with Jubilee Stadium. So we'll jump straight on to those. Chris on Blue Sky, what happened to the Leichhardt Oval pitch? We've already touched on that. So we do thank you for your question, Chris. Bimbo Summich CFP on Blue Sky. Are there other ways to make grass grow in time for the season besides just patiently waiting? Chris, I'll defer this question to you as our resident horticulturalist.
I believe watching it. It's not like paint, it's not like a boiling pot. If you just watch it, it's the best way to get your grass to grow. I understand. Maybe some water, fertilizer. Look, I don't know. I've killed my lawn, so my lawn makes Leichhardt Oval look pretty schmick.
Inner West Council, Chris Macpherson's here for all your horticulturalists.
Very
needs.
hefty government salary, please.
Almost clutch on Blue Sky as well. On a scale of 1 to 10, how back are the victory, and why is the answer 11? Contractually, I'm not allowed to praise Melbourne victory unless it's talking about Kayla Morrison or Alex Chidiac for the Matildas. So, Burke, I will defer this question to you.
Why is the answer 11? The answer is 11 because Emily Gilnick. That's about all you can say, really.
Christian, do you have an answer for clutch?
Victory did lose to Melbourne City last week, so I don't quite agree with that, to be honest with you. Despite being a Victory fan, so I'm sorry, Clutch, that I do not agree. Currently back, you can say, yeah, but I wouldn't give it 11.
You're only as good as your last result, Christian. Come on.
Yeah, true, but I wouldn't praise them that highly. You've got to, pump the brakes a bit, be patient. They had a big test last week against City, weren't able to sort of get past the final hurdle, but this game against Western United certainly showed that they will be in the fight this season. So wouldn't give it an 11 clutch. Like I said, pump the brakes, mate.
Very composed. Unheard of.
Yeah.
Pavito on Blue Sky. Why is Gilnick not wearing the number 9 shirt for Melbourne victory this year? This is not a question I have any sort of answer to. Does anyone else here on the panel have an answer?
No. What was her number last year?
Well, her number last year, I believe, was number 9, based on the way this question's gone. So no idea what the change is or why. So, Pavito, I do thank you for your question. If we can get an answer, this is one we'll keep in the bank to hopefully answer at a later date for you. Dave on Blue Sky, the best way to get to Jubilee without using the train. I believe we did sort of answer this question when we talked about Unite Round, looking at the bus as an option that hitchhike. Maybe not the safest way to travel. We already did touch on the fact that the APL are running shuttles between Sydney Football Stadium and Jubilee Stadium. I can't speak to the reliability of those or what sort of shuttles they're going to be, but that could be an option if you could get into the city. But basically, the message I can give is allow plenty of travel time if you have specific games you want to get to. And then Victory Vikings on Blue Sky are wondering what happened the last 2 times the Melbourne Victory played at Cogra. Does the panel know? Because I have seemingly no idea what happened. I don't recall Melbourne Victory ever playing at Cogra.
Well, yeah, I can't tell you. I mean, I'm sure Google would tell you if you wanted to look. That'd be the...
I only remember that time Victory won at Leichhardt, the grand final.
Yeah.
Grand final? Cogra? No.
Mm-mm. No, that didn't happen. There was definitely no Olympico. I didn't hear about that. No.
Olympico.
Mm-mm.
What even are Olympicos? That sounds like a fake. That sounds like fake news. Fake
Olympico.
news. That's what
I
happened.
bet
Victory
not.
Trump's
Vikings.
back.
That's what happened.
Do we have
Fake news. Victory Vikings. Fake news.
Do we have an answer?
Yes, fake news. Nothing
Yeah,
happened.
fake news. Nothing
Fake
happened.
news.
I hope that answers your question, Victory Vikings, and I very much look forward to seeing you at Cogra at some point this weekend. So we do thank everyone for sending in their questions. Please keep them coming. We absolutely love answering all of them and having some fun with it at the same time. May you enjoy hearing our questions answered as much as Karakuni Cross loves scoring Olympicos. But that will do for this episode of the Dubcast, part of the Round Ball Australia podcast network. Thank you, Christian Montegan.
Thank you, Poletti.
Thank you, Chris Macpherson.
Thanks, Poletti. I'll just confirm we can DM you for lifts to Cogra on the weekend, everyone. Thank you.
I come with a fee. That fee may or may not be exorbitant depending on where I am in the city at the time. Burke, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, as always.
And we'll be back next week on Wednesday to wrap up Unite Round, as well as anything else that may have happened in Australian women's football over the last 7 days. Just before we sign off, just remember, queer women exist in sport. They're everywhere, and they deserve to have children by whichever method they choose, and not receive any sort of hate for it. Thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.